The road ended not with a sign, but with a wall of green. Their jeep, a rugged beast that had chewed through miles of mountain track, finally surrendered to a tangle of ancient roots and thick, creeping fog. Leo, behind the wheel, killed the engine, and the silence that rushed in was absolute. It was a heavy, smothering quiet, broken only by the soft patter of a light, misty rain. "Well," he said, his voice a booming intrusion in the stillness, "this is it. The end of the line." Literally. In the passenger seat, Anya was already unbuckling her harness, her filmmaker's eyes alight with a predatory glee. She held up her camera, panning across the impenetrable forest. "Perfect," she whispered. "It's perfect." In the back, Sam, their sound engineer, adjusted his headphones, a frown creasing his brow. "It's too quiet," he murmured, more to himself than to them. "No birds. No insects. Just nothing." This was their project, their passion. Vanishing Points, a web series dedicated to documenting forgotten places and the legends that clung to them. Their destination was a place most maps didn't show, a valley whispered about in the oldest taverns of the nearest town, Sunken Hollow. The legend was simple, dismissed as superstitious nonsense. They said the valley was echo-locked. That any sound made within its borders would be perfectly repeated, like a ghostly recording, exactly 24 hours later. Not just the sound, but the event, the emotion, the very essence of the moment, would replay itself. A tourist trap story, Leo had declared. But the further they'd driven from civilization, the less sure he felt. They shouldered their packs, heavy with gear, food, and batteries, and began the trek on foot. The path was little more than a deer trail, slick with wet leaves and moss. The air grew colder, the fog thicker, coiling around the gnarled trunks of trees that seemed too old, too twisted, to be real. After an hour of silent, arduous hiking, the forest thinned abruptly, and they saw it. Sunken Hollow. The village lay in the bowl of the valley below, a collection of perhaps 24 stone cottages with sod roofs, clustered around a central green. A narrow, fast-moving river cut through it, crossed by a single stone bridge. It was picturesque, like something from a medieval fairy tale, frozen in time. But the silence was wrong. There was no sign of life. No smoke from chimneys, no movement in the streets. It was a ghost town, preserved in the perpetual damp and mist. Incredible, Anya breathed, her camera whirring as she captured the first shots. They made their way down the steep slope and stepped onto the main street of the village. The cobblestones were worn smooth with age. The cottages, though old, were in surprisingly good repair, their wooden doors and shutters solid. But they were empty. Dusty, cold, and empty. They chose the largest building, a 2-story structure that might have been an inn or a meeting hall, to set up their base. As they pushed the heavy door open, the creak of its iron hinges seemed to hang in the air for a beat too long, as if the silence itself was resisting the disturbance. They worked quickly to set up their equipment in the main room. Sam, ever the professional, was already setting up his sensitive microphones and digital recorders. "I'm going to get some baseline ambient sound," he said, putting on his headphones. He pressed record. His face went slack with confusion. He tapped the recorder. "That's impossible." "What?" Leo asked, looking up from unloading a battery pack. "There's no room tone," Sam said, his voice low. "Every space has a sound, a frequency. Even in an anechoic chamber, you hear your own blood. This is pure digital silence. It's like the air itself is dead." Just then, a sound broke the stillness. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. The laughter of children. It came from the direction of the central green. Anya grabbed her camera. People. I knew it couldn't be completely abandoned. They rushed outside, but the green was empty. The laughter had vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. "An echo," Leo suggested, though he sounded uncertain. "From yesterday?" Sam shook his head, his face pale. "No. That was present. It was happening now. I'm sure of it." As dusk began to settle, painting the mist in shades of purple and grey, they decided to investigate one of the smaller cottages. This one had a single room, a stone hearth cold for decades, and a simple wooden table. On the table, laid out with a chilling precision, were 3 sets of tin plates and cups, covered in a thick layer of dust. It looked as if a family had been about to sit down for a meal a century ago and had simply vanished. Anya filmed everything, her narration a hushed, excited whisper. As she panned across the room, her elbow brushed against one of the tin cups. It clattered to the stone floor, the sound shockingly loud in the dead air. The 3 of them froze, instinctively waiting for the noise to fade. It didn't. It just stopped, as if the sound had been physically severed. A profound sense of wrongness settled over them. That night, huddled around a battery-powered lantern in the old inn, they heard it. It started softly, a ghostly repetition of the day's events. The creak of the front door opening. The sound of their own footsteps on the cobblestones from when they first arrived. Their own whispered conversations from hours earlier, now playing back with perfect, chilling clarity. It was a recording of the day, a spectral rerun. And then, cutting through the ghostly sounds of their own exploration, came the children's laughter again. Clear, bright, and full of life. But it was coming from the empty green, in the pitch black of the night. Sam, his hands trembling, pointed to the waveform on his recorder. "It's a perfect match," he whispered. "The amplitude, the frequency, it's identical to the laughter we heard this afternoon. This isn't an echo. This is a playback." They were not alone in the village. They were living inside a recording. And the day's events were now a permanent part of its terrifying library. Sleep was impossible. The ghostly echoes of their first day in Sunken Hollow played on a loop around them, a cacophony of their own past actions haunting the present. The crunch of their boots, the rustle of their jackets, their own voices discussing the eerie quiet, all of it reverberated through the dark, empty streets. It was a profound violation, their every word and action stolen and preserved by the valley itself. The children's laughter was the worst of it. It would ring out at random intervals, a stark, joyful sound that was utterly horrifying in its context. Just before dawn, the echoes ceased as abruptly as they had begun. The silence that returned was somehow more menacing than before. The 3 of them looked haggard, shadows under their eyes, their nerves frayed. "We need to leave," Sam said, his voice hollow. He was already packing his gear with frantic, jerky movements. "This isn't a legend, Leo. This is. I don't know what this is. A temporal anomaly. A pocket dimension. It's wrong. And miss the story of a lifetime?" Anya countered, though her bravado was thin, stretched over a core of fear. She held her camera like a shield. "We have to understand it. We have to document it." Leo, the pragmatist, was torn. The scientist in him was terrified. The explorer was fascinated. "One more day," he said, his voice firm but his eyes betraying his unease. "We'll do a full survey, try to find the source of this phenomenon. If we find nothing by nightfall, we leave at first light tomorrow." Sam looked like he wanted to argue, but nodded reluctantly. He was too scared to make the trek back through the forest alone. The morning sun did little to burn off the perpetual mist. It simply turned the world a dull, uniform gray. They decided to split up to cover more ground. Anya would film the perimeter of the village and the river. Sam would set up his equipment in different locations, trying to triangulate any source of the echoing phenomenon. Leo would explore the few buildings they hadn't yet entered. It was Sam who found the first real horror. He had set up a recorder near the stone bridge. As he was adjusting the gain, a new sound echoed across the valley. It wasn't a ghost of the previous day. It was older, fainter. The sound of a woman's voice, singing a lullaby in a language he didn't recognize. It was beautiful and sad, and it sent a shiver down his spine. He tracked the sound to a small cottage at the edge of the village, half hidden by overgrown brambles. The door was ajar. Pushing it open, he saw a scene of domestic life, frozen in time. A spinning wheel sat in one corner, a layer of dust on its distaff. And in a small wooden crib, lay a bundle of rags. As the ethereal lullaby swelled around him, Sam saw it. For a fraction of a second, the bundle of rags seemed to form the shape of a sleeping infant. Then it was gone. He stumbled back out of the cottage, gasping for air. The echoes weren't just replaying sounds. They were replaying moments, imprinting the past onto the present with a terrifying visual clarity. Meanwhile, Leo was having his own chilling discovery. In what appeared to be the village's small church, he found the records. Ledgers, meticulously kept, detailing the lives and, more importantly, the deaths of every soul in Sunken Hollow. The last entry was dated over 100 years ago. The cause of death for the entire population of 87 people was listed with a single, cryptic word: quietude. As he read the word, a new echo began. It started as a low murmur, the sound of a crowd gathering. Then, screams. Panicked, desperate screams, mixed with the frantic, dissonant ringing of the church bell. It was the sound of a massacre. Leo dropped the ledger and ran outside. The village green was empty, but the air was thick with the phantom sounds of terror and death. He saw nothing, but he could feel the panic, the despair, as if the emotion itself had been recorded and was now washing over him. He found Anya by the river, her face as white as the mist. She had been filming the water when an echo of a man's desperate, guttural scream had echoed from the center of the stone bridge, followed by the sound of a heavy splash. She had seen nothing, but the sound had been so visceral, so real, it felt like witnessing a murder. They regrouped at the inn, their findings painting a picture of a village trapped in its final, horrific day. The echoes weren't random. They were a chronicle of the apocalypse that had befallen Sunken Hollow. As evening drew in, a new fear began to take root. They had been making sounds all day. Their conversations, their footsteps, their investigations. They had added their own chapter to the valley's deadly audio log. And tomorrow, they would have to listen to it all over again. But it was Sam who voiced the thought that was curdling in all their minds. His voice was a terrified whisper. The loudest echo we made today was when we were arguing this morning about whether to stay or go. He looked at his two friends, his eyes wide with dread. What if we hear an echo of that argument tomorrow, but one of us isn't here to hear it? What if the echo predicts something? The implication hung in the air, cold and sharp. They were no longer just recording the past. They might be listening to their own future. The third day in Sunken Hollow dawned with a new kind of terror, the terror of anticipation. They huddled in the main room of the old inn, the battery-powered lantern casting long, dancing shadows on the walls, waiting for the echoes to begin. They didn't have to wait long. As the first grey light touched the windows, the ghostly audio track of their second day began to play. They heard their own tense, whispered conversations from the morning, the sound of Sam packing his bag in a panic, the crunch of their separate footsteps as they split up to explore. It was unnerving, a constant reminder of their own fear. Then came the echo they had been dreading. Their argument from the previous morning flooded the village, clear and sharp. Sam's voice, frantic: "We need to leave. This isn't a legend, Leo. This is. I don't know what this is. It's wrong." Leo's voice, strained but firm: "One more day. We'll do a full survey. If we find nothing by nightfall, we leave at first light tomorrow." Anya's voice, edged with fear: "We have to understand it." Hearing it played back was a visceral experience. The fear in Sam's voice was palpable, the stubborn determination in Leo's was chilling, and the desperate curiosity in Anya's sounded like madness. But the echo ended exactly as the real argument had. There was no new sound, no ominous addition. A collective, shaky sigh of relief passed between them. Sam's theory was wrong. The echoes were just recordings of the past. They weren't prophetic. Buoyed by this small victory, a renewed, grim determination took hold. They had to find the source. Leo, poring over the village ledgers again, found a recurring reference to the listening stone, a place where the village elders would go to hear the heart of the valley. It was described as being at the place where the water falls but makes no sound. Anya remembered the river. They had followed it, but hadn't seen a waterfall. They decided to trace the river upstream, beyond the village boundary. The forest here was even denser, the air colder. The sound of the rushing water was the only thing that seemed to exist outside the valley's eerie acoustic laws. After an hour of difficult hiking, they found it. The river plunged over a sheer cliff of black rock, falling at least 100 feet into a deep, mist-shrouded pool. But just as the ledger had said, it made no sound. The water fell in a silent, majestic curtain, a terrifying violation of physics. And there, at the edge of the silent pool, was a single, massive standing stone, dark and slick with spray. It was shaped vaguely like a giant, upturned ear. The listening stone. As they approached it, the air grew thick and heavy. Sam set up his recorder, his hands trembling. The silence here, it's even deeper. It's absorbing everything. Anya filmed the silent waterfall, a look of profound unease on her face. Leo reached out and placed a hand on the cold, wet surface of the stone. The moment his skin made contact, the world erupted in sound. It wasn't an echo from a single day. It was a torrent, a cacophony of a century of captured noise. Children laughing, women singing, men arguing, tools working, the church bell ringing, the screams of the final day, it all poured out of the stone at once, a deafening wave of history. And with the sound came flickers of light, ghostly images superimposed over the real world. They saw the village as it was, vibrant, alive, full of people. They saw the panic on the final day, people running, their mouths open in silent screams. The stone wasn't just a recorder, it was a reservoir, and Leo's touch had cracked it open. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence rushed back, more absolute than ever. They stood there, panting, ears ringing, their minds struggling to process the sensory assault. They had found the source. The entire valley was a giant, natural recording device, and this stone was its core. As they stumbled back towards the village, a new, chilling realization dawned on them. Their own sounds from this morning, their relieved sighs, their decision to find the stone, their footsteps on this very path, were now being added to the stone's library. They were contributing to the very phenomenon that terrified them. That night, the echoes began earlier. They heard their own journey to the waterfall, their shocked reactions to the silent cascade, the devastating audiovisual blast from the listening stone. But woven into the fabric of their own day's recording was something else. Something new. Faint, at first, but growing clearer. It was the sound of 3 sets of frantic, running footsteps. Heavy, panicked breathing. And a sound they couldn't place, a low, guttural, scraping sound, like stone grinding against stone. They listened, frozen in horror, as the phantom sounds of their own future played out in the dark. The echo predicted the argument's end, but it had recorded the consequence of their entire day. They were listening to themselves fleeing from something. The echo wasn't just a recording of the past. It was a perfect, inescapable recording of the future, and it ended with the sound of a desperate, final struggle, and then, the quietude. Sam looked at his friends, his face a mask of utter despair. "We were wrong," he whispered. "The argument wasn't the prediction. Our decision to stay, that was the prediction. This is our tomorrow." The 4th day was a death sentence. They had heard their own fate, a perfect audio play of the terror that awaited them. The sounds of their flight, their panic, and that final, grinding silence were now etched into their minds. They spent the morning in a state of catatonic dread, waiting for the chain of events to begin. The echoes of their 3rd day played out, culminating in the horrifying sounds of their future. It was a tautological nightmare. Hearing the prediction ensured its fulfillment. It started at noon. The low, grinding sound from the echo began, seeming to emanate from the very earth itself. It was the listening stone. It was active. As the sound grew louder, the echoes around them began to change. The ghostly sounds of the village's past started to solidify. The laughing children were no longer just sounds, they were faint, shimmering outlines running through the streets. The woman singing the lullaby was a translucent figure in the doorway of her cottage. The past was becoming physically present, a overlapping layer of reality. "The stone is overloading," Leo yelled over the increasing din. "It's not just playing back sound anymore, it's manifesting the past. We have to get out of here." This was the cue. The frantic running footsteps from the echo began as they sprinted from the inn, heading for the path that led out of the valley. But the village itself was fighting back. The phantom villagers, now visible as pale, shimmering forms, moved to block their way, their faces empty, their mouths open in silent, echoing screams. They were not malicious, but they were solid. Pushing through them felt like moving through a wall of cold, resistant water. The guttural, grinding sound was coming from the forest behind them. They risked a glance back. The trees at the edge of the village were dissolving. Not falling, but unraveling into sound and light, being erased and absorbed back into the stone's core. The valley was resetting itself, consuming the present to preserve the perfect, echoing past. The quietude wasn't a peaceful end, it was an erasure. They reached the forest path, their lungs burning. The grinding sound was closer now, a wave of annihilation following them. The world behind them was being unmade, converted into pure acoustic energy. Sam, struggling with his heavy pack of equipment, stumbled. Anya turned to help him, but Leo grabbed her arm. "Leave it. There's no time." The echo of their own panicked breathing and shouted words from the future played around them, a maddening soundtrack to their flight. They burst out of the tree line and onto the steep slope leading out of the valley. The grinding was right behind them. They scrambled upwards, tearing their hands on rocks and roots. Below, they saw the wave of dissolution touch the edge of the forest they had just left. The trees, the mist, the very light, everything flattened into a wall of roaring static before being sucked back into the valley's heart, leaving only a blank, silent grayness in its wake. They didn't stop until they collapsed, exhausted and terrified, next to their abandoned jeep. The grinding had stopped. The silence of the mountains was natural, filled with the wind and the distant call of a bird. Sunken Hollow was gone. Not just hidden by mist, but gone. The valley below was just an empty, geological basin, devoid of any trace of the village or the forest that had surrounded it. They had escaped. But they had brought something with them. A final, lingering echo, trapped in Sam's highest quality recorder, which he had clutched in his hand the entire way. Back in the city, as they tried to piece their lives back together, they played it. It was the sound from the very end of their predicted future, the sound that had preceded the quietude. It wasn't the grinding of the stone. It was the sound of their own voices, from a moment that had never happened in their timeline, a desperate, failed timeline the valley had recorded as a possibility. Leo's voice, screaming, "It's taking her. Don't let it." A final, agonized scream from Anya, cut short. Then, the grinding silence. The valley had shown them the worst possible outcome. It had used their fear to herd them, to make them run exactly as they needed to in order to escape. The echo was not just a recording. It was a sentient, predatory thing, and it had manipulated them into becoming a part of its eternal, terrifying symphony. They had escaped with their lives, but they would forever be prisoners of the sound, knowing that somewhere, in a dimension of pure memory, a version of them had not been so lucky, and their final moments were now a permanent part of the echo.